Welcome to the Australian Business Executive Podcast, where we speak with Australia's most influential industry professionals on the business and economic development issues taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with all our content, including our magazines, podcasts and videos by visiting www.theabe.com.au and clicking on subscribe.
Today's guest is Danielle Newport, Managing Director and CEO of Activ Foundation. Danielle was appointed CEO and Managing Director of Activ in 2016. She joined Activ in 2011 and served in a variety of executive roles before becoming CEO. Danielle is a graduate member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, a qualified accountant and chartered secretary with over 15 years' experience working in senior corporate and finance roles. She has extensive knowledge of the disability sector and currently serves on the national board of the NDS. Danielle is passionate about supporting people living with disability and is extremely dedicated to improving the lives of Activ's customers. Danielle, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Jesse. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin and purpose of Activ Foundation?
Activ was founded in the early 1950s here in Western Australia. What's unusual about Activ is we were founded by families who had children living with intellectual disability. They were quite exceptional people who didn't accept the status quo in the early 50s and had the courage and vision to create a better world. We still believe that vision drives us as an organisation. So we support people living with disability to enjoy full participation in all of their communities and pursue the life that they choose.
And so how many people do you assist in the community through Activ Foundation's work?
So we have about 100 locations across WA, and we support approximately 2,000 people living with disability. We also support their families. So that's a number of people that we don't count in our systems, but we are vital in their lives. Of the 2,000 people living with disability that we do support, over 1,000 work for us in our local communities in commercial contracts through what's known as a disability enterprise.
And how has the perception of disability changed over the years?
I think when we were founded, so nearly 70 years ago, people probably thought about people living with disability in terms of how they could fit into our communities. What's different now is we think about how our communities can accommodate people living with disability. So we all think about our communities being accessible and inclusive. So I think we've really switched it round to see that our communities owe a good life to people living with disability. Okay.
And being based in WA, are there any unique issues that you would face that would be different to what other states would encounter?
So obviously the issue that would be immediately obvious to most people is being a resources-based economy. We have some real challenges with the cost of doing business in Western Australia, which isn't always reflected in universal pricing across Australia. We also have, as you all know, remote communities, so many communities who have struggled to receive any supports, not only for people living with disability, but for all disadvantaged members of those communities. We also suffer from the remoteness from Canberra, so we're a long way away from our decision makers. That adds to our cost of business, but it also makes it more difficult to build those really effective partnerships and relationships with government. I mean, we work hard to combat all of those issues, but it's important to recognise it is different here in WA.
Indeed. You've been with the organisation for a number of years. Are there any milestones that you can recall that have marked noted change for Activ Foundation?
There are a number of really exciting things that have happened since I joined in the organisation. I can mention just a few. So Activ owns the WA City to Surf running event. So, and in 2015, we celebrated 40 years running that event for the WA community, which was an amazing milestone. The year after that, in 2016, we celebrated 65 years of our organisation. And in that same year, we all celebrated me becoming the first female CEO. which is a milestone, I think, in an organisation that wants to be inclusive and accessible to everybody. I think it was an important step. And obviously, in this year, we've had our first customers transitioning into the formal federal NDIS system, which is an enormous milestone for us. The NDIS, I know we will talk about, but it's such a fundamental shift in our the way we work. It's really important that we celebrate entering that scheme.
Well, why don't we talk about that? So with the NDIS, it is a significant shift in terms of how the federal government implements funding for people with disabilities. Could you give us a brief explanation on what the NDIS is and how you believe that this is going to affect your organization moving forward?
Sure. So the NDIS, the vision and the intention of the NDIS is something that nobody can disagree with. So it's about choice and control for people living with disability. And that may seem like an obvious vision, but the reality is for many people living with disability, historical systems have not delivered that choice. So organisations have been block funded by government and customers have had to go where the funding is. What happens under the NDIS is a person living with disability and their family can make choices about who delivers services, when services are delivered, and in some areas actually what services and supports they need. I think it's important to remember that many of the people living with disability who will be supported by the NDIS are receiving quite personal, intimate support through their funding. And it's actually quite shocking to think they haven't had the choice about who supports them. So I think we're all very behind that element of choice and control. What it means for us as an organisation is we go from 2 or 3 government customers to 2,000 individual customers. That's an opportunity for us to review how we listen to our customers, how we make sure that they have choice embedded in how we support them, and really establish a relationship of equals with our customers living with disability to make sure that we are the right provider for them. It's challenging for us as an organisation. There are many back office things that are very challenging, but I am very comfortable to say that however we experience it, the transition is more challenging for our customers and families. So we're so happy to support customers and families going through the system and look forward to, I guess, what the future holds. Because in the future, as people living with disability get used to having choices, we'll be able to co-design programs with them, we'll be able to involve the community more, and I'm sure there are opportunities for technology to really leverage choice for people living with disability.
Okay. The NDIS has been something that's been talked about for a number of years now. We're seeing its implementation, which is why it's taking up, its fair share of the news cycle. But for people like myself who don't really sit in the space, what are the other, broader issues taking place around, disability, support, and funding that you can inform us about? Okay,
so if I think about the broadest level of disability, and really it's a fundamental assumption under the NDIS, is that people living with disability will have access to informal supports within their communities. So under the NDIS, disability is no longer an issue for people with disability, it's an issue for all of us. And if I reflect on another issue, which is quite close to my heart, that of gender inequality, nobody expects gender inequality to be fixed by women. They understand that men need to be part of the solution. And I think the community needs to realise that the NDIS isn't going to fix the problem. The problem is one that we all have to come together and fix. And that's about our expectations and aspirations for people living with disability, but also our expectations and aspirations for our organisations and how accessible they are, and that we understand that the best outcome for people living with disability is good for all of us.
And Danielle, before we finish up today, is there anything else that you'd like to add or mention?
So the employment of people living with disability is a subject very close to my heart because we have 1,000 employees living with disability. And employment for people with disability is statistically significantly lower than for those without disability, so 53% compared to 83%. And I would like to encourage all businesses to think about how they can make their organisations better by including and supporting people living with disability, because I think we all understand now that diversity actually makes our organisation stronger and helps us drive better performance. So I would really like every employer, every business in Australia to think about how they can be part of improving inclusion for people living with disability. And my last point is 18% of Australians live with disability. So this is everybody's issue. It's not a minority issue. This is a mainstream population issue. So if everybody got involved and worked towards better outcomes, I think we could achieve amazing things.
Danielle, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Jesse.
This has been a production of the Australian Business Executive, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Australian Business Executive, including our magazines, podcasts and videos, by visiting www.theabe.com.au and clicking on subscribe.